Today's webinar, Managing Requirements in ALM, Avoid 10 Common Pitfalls. My name is Andre Herbs and I'm one of the co-leaders of the Vivid South Africa chapter. I'm in Cape Town and I work for a company called Kajima, and I work in the monitoring space, network devices and file servers. This webinar series is brought to you by the Vivid South Africa chapter and the Testing, Quality and Application Life Cycle Management Special Interest Group, TQASIG. The South Africa chapter lead is by Michael Gregorescu and myself. The TQASIG is led by Chris Sharo, Ollie Laiho, Andreas Berg, and Bernard Simzak. To join the Vivid South Africa chapter and the Vivid TQASIG, go to the South Africa chapter page and the TQASIG page on the Vivid website and click Join Group icon. Your input is welcome on new topics. Our presenter today is Mihai Grigorescu, Test Manager, iLab South Africa. Some housekeeping. Today's live session is intended for all Vivid members, and the recording will be posted on Vivid's webinar section on the website for all Vivid members. If you have questions as we go along, please type and send them in using the questions pane in the webinar control panel. Here's a picture of the GoToWebinar control panel that usually appears in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. To submit a question, type in your question and click on Send. So let's get started. I will turn it over to Mihai.
Hello, thank you, Andre, for the introduction. Hello, everyone on the call. My name is Mihai Grigorescu, and as Andre has aptly put it, I'm a test manager in the ALM space, and today I will be your pilot in this presentation. We will be discussing today about managing requirements for ALM and avoiding the common pitfalls. And basically, this is just the first one of the first of the series that we will be having for HP's quality sensor / application lifecycle management. Okay, so if you have any questions, please raise your hand or ask a question in the question box as Andre has explained. We will take all the Q&A session. We'll have it at the end of the presentation. Without further ado, somebody needs to mute the mic, please. Okay, we'll carry on forward. Okay, not sure that everybody is hearing me perfectly, but I hear some fine noise in the back end. All right, I shall carry on. Great, it stopped. Thank you. Okay, we will be looking at the agenda as follows. We'll be looking at the backgrounds of why do we need to talk about managing requirements and not managing ALM as a complete tool set. And then we'll go to the 10 pitfalls, the do's and the don'ts in ALM and how to treat requirements. Now, remember that this is actually based on 10 steps on how to mismanage requirements, as I initially entitled my session. I've now changed it to the do's and don'ts, and it's basically going to show you what to do and what not to do from a technical perspective. All right? Now, let's go forward through the backgrounds. So, where do development requirements come from? And it's really a question of where do requirements, generally speaking, in any IT projects come from? And why do we need to have a proper requirements management process in place? All of this is because we know in an ideal world, eventually, and obviously, business drives IT while IT enables businesses through their strategic alignment. Now, it means that from our perspective, from a high-level overview, business, I'm assuming that we're all in IT, so from our perspective, meaning from the IT perspective, it means that business always has requirements for us. Whether there are new projects, whether they are ongoing projects ready for upgrades and maintenance, we will always have IT projects that are dictated from a business level onwards. In many times, we know that people and customers in quality center and ALM, they're mostly using the requirements just from a testing perspective, which is one of the pitfalls. We know that the requirements need to be captured from the beginning, not just as a testing requirement, but from the beginning as business requirements coming from the top. So you will probably ask yourselves, why do I, as person X and Y and Z now sitting on the call, why do I now need to know how to manage requirements in LM? Well, the answer is pretty simple. We are looking at managing requirements, making or breaking our business, really, at the end of the day. It all translates into money. Everything that we do in LM has a monetary value that is expressed to our company that we work for. If you look on the right-hand side, we have the software quality hazards across all industries, and this is based on software quality reports made by Capus and Jones in 2010. Okay, and the first point in there that is that software is blamed for all the major businesses issues. Okay, and there are a lot of money that are wasted through software. We will talk about my sources just now, but in principle, it means that if we don't manage a project right, we will lose money. If you don't manage a project right, it means that your requirements within them, whether they're functional or technical or testing, they're not managed right, and it leads to failure in projects. So this is why it's so important that we know how to manage ALM requirements. We are now looking at another statistic from orau.org. They had some great statistics with regards to cost of waste, and a lot of that is because people don't use their tools properly, and they don't have the right skill set, and they don't have the right processes. So it's all related to the people, processes, and tools, really. What we're going to discuss tonight, and what I'm going to show you, is a bit of everything, really. But it's mostly related to the tool itself, which is HPLM. Okay, so you can see here we have lots of billions of dollars and other numbers we cannot imagine. And the most important thing you need to look at is, excuse me for that, is the 40 to 70% of the budget and schedule for each project spent on testing. Therefore, a lot of money of these projects go into testing, and hopefully more money will go more into testing, because that's my area of expertise, and in testing we just want to get more business, as always. Why do I still need to know how to manage requirements? And this is the question that I'll answer with about 2 or 3 answers for now. First of all, you have at your disposal, and I'm assuming here that everybody on the call has used at least once, and hopefully is using currently, HP Quality Center or ALM. So we know that there's always the debate about best of breeds versus other types of applications. We know HP ALM is the best of breeds in the market. So in order for you to maximize the return of investment on your tool, you need to properly manage requirements. This is very important. So answer number 1 was because you have at your disposal the best, one of the best of breed development and testing tools in the market. And this comes, my second point comes in addition to the first point, the fact that if you look on the Gartner Magic Chart, you will see HP on the right-hand side corner, which means HP is the leader in both visionary and level of implementation. So therefore, you need to use it properly in order to get your money back, really, because it's also the most expensive tool out there. So if you don't use it properly, you are constantly wasting money in your IT projects. And the third point was, if you cannot manage requirements properly, you lose visibility, you lose transparency. Therefore, you as an IT team, along with your project manager, with your developers and your testers, cannot demonstrate the value to business. In here we have another figure from another report, which is called Quality Report from Capers-Jones, from Capgemini and HP, which was done in 2011. And on the first side, on the top side, you will see that the interviewed customers said that they aligned their metrics to their business goals. And that's what I wanted to bring up here. If you don't align your metrics and all your static data that comes out of Quality Center properly, you cannot demonstrate business value to business. Excuse me. So therefore, you have your answers. Why do you need to manage your requirements properly in Quality Center and LM? This next slide here shows how people are extracting reports from their projects to present to their stakeholders. As you can see, it's just a small portion of people that actually use the inbuilt reporting and graph systems from Quality Center. Everyone else uses Excel and other BI tools and other types of tools. So it's really, really amazing how people do not use the inbuilt features. One of the great BI tools that you need to look out there is from Assure. They actually do a lot of great work in that field, but that's for another webinar. All right, so the sources that I mentioned earlier are the World Quality Report 2011-2012 done by Capgemini in association with HP and Sogeti, and the other one was Software Quality and Service of the done in 2010. Haha, there's a bug there, November 2, 2010. This was done by Capers-Jones. And both of them are available to you. You just need to drop me an email, or Andre as well, and we will be happy to deliver these reports to you in PDF format. Carrying on, let's go now to the meat of this presentation, which is the 10 pitfalls of mismanaging requirements. And to start off with what I had in mind, if the people on the audience are movie buffs, I was actually thinking of the movie, a very old movie with Kate Hudson and I think it was Matthew McConaughey, if I'm not mistaken. It was called How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days or in 10 Steps or something of sort. So in a similar way, I thought, let me put up a presentation and let me entitle it How to Mismanage Requirements in 10 Easy Steps. Unfortunately, HP didn't like that too much, so we had to change that to the do's and don'ts, and it was going to be presented in Vegas. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it to Vegas. So for anyone who will be attending HP Discover in Frankfurt, you will probably see this presentation again there. So to start off with, the 10 pitfalls start from number 1: do not use requirements module at all. And what does that mean for us? It means that we're actually cutting out 2 essential parts of this equation. The requirements module show us, just a second, I need to move this screen. The requirements specification phase is showing us and the team what am I developing and what am I testing. So if you take that out, then you just start working on the test plan and you build up your test cases, and then you execute them, and then you use defect tracking to monitor all incidents that were logged throughout this life cycle. So the problem is, if you cut out the requirements, then what am I testing? What am I developing? One cannot just simply go and start building test cases. And I emphasize on this because I see this issue with a lot of testing teams. Everybody just starts creating test cases, designing test cases with steps, but they have no requirements. So why are you testing whatever you're testing in there? You need to have a set of requirements. Okay? So therefore, not making use of requirements management, you cannot understand nor show what is developed, what is tested, and what is the progress on that. That means that you also cannot use the release management module with releases and cycles. So if you do not use requirements, then release planning also goes out the window. And then Also, with regards to license, if you don't use requirements management, then you obviously are not realizing ALM's full potential, which means you have no practical return of investment. You might as well just pack up and go home. Really, it's that bad. I've seen teams that are not using requirements for a very long period of time, and it's a constant battle that we in testing are struggling with. So, I think this is pretty clear. You must use requirements. That's the bottom line. Okay, in this case, I'll still keep it to do not use requirements at all. So moving on to the next point is what I've mentioned earlier. We use requirements management only for testers. Requirements module is not just for testers. And if you can see a screenshot on the right-hand side here from Quality Center, you see just the default types that are created within ALM. You have group, functional, business testing, and performance. These types are customizable. Sky is the limit. Requirements can be used for a range of teams from developers, BAs, SMEs, supports, whatever you can think of and whatever works and it's not overly complicated will work for you in managing in Quality Center. Okay? So this, folks, is about not falling into the trap of thinking that testers and the testing team are generally the only teams that are using Quality Center. From inception, requirements need to be used in conjunction with the developers, with the project manager, and then further down testers as well. Okay, so that will be your second pitfall, using requirement management only to create testing requirements in a project. That's wrong. Pitfall number 3, do not use customizations and extra fields to show effort, durations, or actuals. I'm sure that many of you know, and for the people that don't know about this fact, Quality Center and ALM are actually just the middle layer in your production stack. You are looking at PPM, which is Portfolio Project Management from HP, which is the initial part of initiating projects. The information that PPM extracts and extrapolates comes from Quality Center. So effectively, Quality Center can give input to the high-level stakeholders on how much of time is required to perform a certain project, how much of development time, how much in terms of duration, in terms of days, weeks, and months, and also on actuals, where are we with the project. So with that in mind, you need to understand how to use the customizations in such a way that you get most of the information out seamlessly, effortlessly to your project managers, which in turn will take this information to your stakeholders. So things like, as I mentioned in here, effort and duration. You have estimated number of hours that you're going to spend on a certain requirement. If you're using an agile approach, you will be looking at user points. You can also relate to the timelines. So you say new requirement is going to take me 2 weeks. So it's all about how you think these requirements will feed into the bigger picture, into the one level of truth. So not using customizations and just using the default values and the default fields is going to get the work done, but you need to use smart customizations and allow the people to see everything that needs to be seen from the requirements perspective. Because remember, the requirements are the starting points and the starting block, the stepping stone. Can't think of any other metaphors now, but this is the start of any given project. So think smartly, customize enough, don't overcomplicate things, and you got yourself a good project going. Which brings me to number 4, which is make requirements now fall into the other side, where you make requirements too complex to capture. This is actually something from a project, and they had assigned to, effort in actual, effort required, incident number, products reviewed, systems affected, target release, and I can go on and on and on. And now the problem is, out of these fields, they are having the developers and the testers capture. None of these, or mostly none of these fields, are used in reporting. So obviously I asked that team this particular question. I said, why do you use so many mandatory fields and make a requirement too complex to capture? You're spending 10 minutes of capturing a single requirement where you could spend just 2 minutes, and now you have to capture all this information in, and for what? So the bottom line is, if it's not used in reporting and nobody uses a particular field, do not make it mandatory. Do not make the requirements too complex to capture. So there you go. Number 5. Let's look at number 5. People think that requirements in general and development doesn't need a process flow, which is very, very, very incorrect. Everything in development and testing requires a proper process flow. Therefore, requirements engineering requires a proper process flow. Well, you look at this picture that I just Googled and I just chucked in here to get my point across. You have your business requirements, and then you create use case models and so on and so forth, and then you test and you deploy, and then you go back and then the requirements get updated and so on and so forth. So it's not really something that I'm using. I just put the picture in there to show my point, which is have an actual process to support. Excuse me, my headphone just slipped over. So have an actual process to support your modeling activities in terms of requirements. Okay. We know that all the teams are just given a tool, and they're not giving too much of thought on how to actually capture the requirements. Which flow do they need to follow, going from BA to a developer to a tester and back to a BA and back to a developer and so on and so forth. So it's really not making use of the existing assets and the existing workflows. In Quality Center, you already have that available to you. You just need to enable them and just need to customize a bit here and there according to your needs. You have things like auto mail notifications and flagging and traceability matrices that can all be used to manage your requirements properly. Okay, so the 5th pitfall, in my view, is do not use a workflow and an actual process to support your modeling. Okay, that was another process flow with regards to requirements and testing in general. These, as Andre mentioned earlier, this session will be recorded, so you'll be able to access it later on and view the slides again. For the people who would like to get a copy of this presentation, please email me or Andre or Susan or Stephanie, and we will be gladly sending you a PDF version of it. Okay, let's move on to number 6. Number 6 is one of my favorites ever since the introduction of version 10 in Quality Center, which is not using version control. This is my 6th pitfall. And now this is very interesting because I've moved around in testing centers of excellence ranging from a few people to a few hundreds of people, and in most of the cases, in most of the teams, work is done the same. Business analysts are usually coming in with their Word documents, and they're creating hundreds and tens of pages of business requirement specifications, and they save over and over and over, trying to do a version control on the requirement document, whether they're using a SharePoint site or whatever else. They're always trying to keep the versions updated. And the pitfall in here is, why don't business analysts use the version control within ALM? I mean, it's already there, and it gives a history. And you can see what happened from version 1 to version 5 to version 10 to version whichever. And you can always go back and restore a specific version. So essentially, the problem is people don't know of version control, and the people that do know of version control, they do not use it, and it's such a powerful tool. And as I mentioned on the left-hand side in my notes, people are using Microsoft Word caption requirements, and you go and you leave a trail of 25.5 number of versions, and you don't know which version the BA is referring to when working for a specific defect. It happens so many times that in my teams, people have gone and logged defects and then have pointed out to a document that was not updated in its shared folder or SharePoint site or whatever the case was. So in essence, we need to use version control. We can also go to the extent of if your project doesn't want to use version control on the project, then at least use maybe SharePoint site, which has version control in it, and your requirement will then have to contain a link to that version control SharePoint site. So there are workarounds, but in essence, people need to use version control. Okay, moving on to number, yes, sorry about that. We're still on number 6. In here you can actually see what I was mentioning earlier. If you look at the history in version control, you can see which versions have been modified when, by whom, and then if you look forwards, you will actually see what has changed from what to what. Obviously, this is just a mock screenshot. It's not a real requirement. I've just created that particular requirement to demonstrate the value of using version control. And you can see in the description at the bottom here in the screenshot that it shows the differences between version 2 compared to version 4. In version 2, my description looked like A plus B equals C, and in version 4, it looked like A plus B equals A plus B, and so on and so forth. So in essence, you're looking at 2 different types of requirements, and essentially you can look at it from a different perspective. You can look at it from, I'm looking at 2 documents which contain 2 different requirements, which are referring to the same functionality in the system, but were done at a different point in time. And, well, this is the most accurate one, X, Y, Z, whichever. So I hope everybody agrees with me when saying that version control is very important and start using it. Okay, moving on to number 7. Again, another obscure feature that is not used at all in all the teams that I've seen, and that is RBQM, risk-based quality management. So pitfall number 7 is do not use the risk assessment built into Quality Center. We know that out there, and if you Google, you'll probably find lots and lots of these types of tools. But we know that predominantly we have the FMEA, which is the failure mode effects analysis, which is basically one big Excel spreadsheet, and we type in our requirements in there, and capture our requirements in there, and then assign different grading statuses, which relate to the impact of that particular requirement failing, times its impact on business, which will give you a final grading score, and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, you will have high risk requirements and low risk requirements. And one of the bases of risk-based testing is we don't have enough budget, we don't have enough time, let's test what is most riskiest. And in that sense, FMEA works, but the problem is you've already got RBQM within Quality Center. And as you can see from my screenshot, you have the assessment questions, which look at business criticality, failure probability, and functional complexity. Personally, don't like the functional complexity one because most of the teams out there are not mature enough in their development, so it's not going to help too much out. However, business criticality relates to what I mentioned earlier, which is impacts. And as you can see, you have 4 different questions with four different values that I've captured for this particular screenshot, which is type of process calculation, impact of failure being legal, frequency of use very often, and number of affected users being many or high. All of these calculations can be customized, and all of these calculations will lead up to these requirements having a risk assessment done to it. If we move on to the next screenshot, it's actually pretty simple. You capture 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 requirements under one folder with those particular types of questions, and then when you perform a risk analysis on that particular folder or group of requirements, you would see something that looks like this. Again, this is just for demonstration purposes, unfortunately, so it's not a live project. But in essence, here it shows you which requirements are high from a severity perspective, which ones are medium, and which ones are low. Okay, so we're looking at risk. Then you have the possibility for each and every single type of requirement to capture how many hours of testing is required, how many hours you can also include how many hours of development. So you say for one particular high requirement, I will have to use, let's say, 40 hours. Now those calculations will relate back into here, and as you can see, I'm not sure if you see my mouse. Let's see now, arrow options. Okay, if you see my mouse now, you will see that there's a number here that says total required time 58 hours. Okay, now these 58 hours come from somewhere. They come from the calculation that I've done at the bottom, and well, it's pretty self-explanatory that in doubt, you take these numbers to the project manager and you motivate as to why you need so many hours for testing, because this is one of the other issues we have in terms of testing. People don't simply want to give us a lot of money to go test. They just tell us, well, you have 2 weeks time, test everything that you can within those 2 weeks. And it's really hard to show back to the project managers, this is how much of hours I actually need based on these types of calculations. And at the moment, myself, I'm doing it manually. I'm also not using with my current teams or my former teams actually. I haven't used RBQM to its full extent. So let's go back. So in here, you can actually see based on your risk-based quality management and your risk assessment for your requirements, you can see and you can start estimating how much of hours would you need in order to perform testing. What I didn't show in here, and I'm sorry I didn't put that in, now come to think of it, is the fact that you also have coverage for this particular risk analysis tab, which shows you how much of hours do you need to perform full testing, so 100% of all those requirements. Obviously, those numbers being abstract. Then how much of testing time would you require to perform partial, basic, and none. None is obviously 0, so it's not even a section for discussion. But irrespective, your requirements, if they captured in the beginning from your BAs, and if there are BAs on the line, please go ahead and use the requirements management module properly. Use risk-based quality management to your advantage. That will give the development and the testing team a cutting edge in terms of how to estimate how many number of hours do they require for their particular effort. All right, so moving on now, we've done number 7. We're going to look at number 8, which is another great pitfall from my perspective. Do not use release planning and management. So this screenshot here is actually showing us, and this is from a real project now, so this is actually was live production data. It's actually showing us some few numbers. If everyone can just look at my mouse. It shows us the number of days in release, the remaining days, elapsed time in release, which is also everything in here is automated, so you don't have to input anything in here. And it brings up this information from the test lab where you're running a specific set of test cases. And now here's the trick part. you cannot use, and one cannot use this particular view, which is very informative of progress and status quo of a project at any given point in time. One cannot use this particular screen if the requirements are not used. So if you don't use requirements, you will only see these numbers here, which will be only coming from the test lab, which means test cases. If you don't have requirements that you link to test cases, you will not be able to see this graph, and the whole rest of the progress tabs is going to be dented. It's not going to have accurate information. It happened to me before, and I didn't know what was going on, and it turns out that my team didn't actually create requirements. They created only half of the requirements, and half of those requirements were only linked to test cases. So in essence, build requirements, link all of them to test cases, and then you will be able to have this view so easily that it's actually unbelievable. And another problem with requirements, especially in an iterative environment, consider this. We have a waterfall, we're using a waterfall model. So we will be testing the same requirements all over again in 3 different cycles, 3 different iterations. Most of the teams that are out there are using a field in the requirements module within Quality Center, which is called DCS, which stands for Direct Cover Status. Now, the Direct Cover Status is going to show you the last executed state of the test cases coming back to a requirement. So requirement 1 is now passed in cycle 1, and in cycle 2 it's going to be failed. So the last execution state of this requirement is actually failed, it's not passed. But if you don't use release management, you will not be able to see these types of differences and subtle changes in cover status within requirements across different iterations. So if you remember the first slide that I showed you, or among the first slide was, if you don't use requirements properly, you don't use release management properly. If you don't use release management properly, it ping-pongs back to your requirements, and they're going to show you as failed. You're going to be in the middle of your second execution or your second cycle, and you just started testing requirement 1 through 5 out of 50, and the rest of the requirements will show you now as failed or blocked or whatever the case is, which is a mixture in between what you've executed up to date in cycle 2 and what you've executed in cycle 1 as a remainder. So it's really a mix-up, and people will never ever get the proper information out of it. With that in mind, you will never ever be able to get proper information out here if requirements are not used properly with release management and so on and so forth. So therefore, pitfall number 8, do not use release planning and management. It will give you a lot of hassles. I promise you at least that. Okay, moving now to number 9. People don't use coverage analysis. Within Quality Center, you have different views. And you have the tree view, the detail view, the coverage analysis, and so on and so forth. One of the main things to use is actually the coverage analysis. And I don't understand why people don't use this. I mean, it's so simple. They just go and they extract all the requirements and all the test cases that they executed for the day. They're extracting all that information into Excel, and then they're manipulating the data in there to show how much of percentages and how much of passed and failed and not completed and blocked and so on and so forth test records you have in there. This view is just one click away from the requirements in the coverage analysis section. So you do this, you have the most updated type of information that one can have, and its own requirements. It shows you, if you see my mouse, it shows you the past requirements. On the top side here, by the way, we have the requirements. At the bottom, we have the test coverage chart, which shows you that all the test cases that are associated with these requirements on the top. So overall, what I want to see as a test manager and as a project manager, I want to see this big bar of requirements all green at the end of my project. I don't want to see any reds, which is failed. I don't want to see any grays, which is blocked, and I certainly don't want to see any of this, help me out here guys, I'm not good with color, any of this color here, which is no run. These are actually the same requirements over two different cycles, and as you can see, the numbers differ quite a lot. Okay, you can see this the same type of requirement, and this is what I was talking about earlier. If the requirements do not get managed properly and worked on properly with the test cases and releases, this view will not be possible. In essence, what I'm saying is, this view here was for the first cycle, which we had to cut down short. This is for the second cycle, and we see a slight improvement. However, these 58 past year are not equal to these 62 past year. They're probably a bit different. But as you can see, the numbers differ. But these numbers are completely accurate. And the way this coverage analysis is used can really make a big picture for the project manager in conjunction with the other progress tab that I showed you earlier from the release management. So for me, it's pretty easy. When the project manager comes to me and asks me, Mihai, please show me how are my requirements looking, I'm just going to go to the requirement section, coverage analysis, filter down or zoom in on that particular set of requirements that he's interested in, or she, if it's a female project manager, and we're going to look at this. And herein you have contained all the information. If the project manager asks me, and I'm going to roll back now to the previous slide, if the project manager asks me, what is your progress, Mihai, and are we behind or are we ahead of schedule? I'm going to be looking at this graph here, and I'm going to look at the elapsed time and the instance runs, and how my coverage looks between executed and passed. And I'm going to tell you, well, dear project manager, yes, we're ahead of time with the instances, but we're not doing so good because we have a big gap, which means failed test case, which means we have to go back and reschedule this cycle and rerun all the requirements again in testing. So you see, it's pretty easy for me from a test management perspective, and for the project manager as well, to go through these types of progress bars and charts, which makes our lives a lot more easier, and we can be proactive about it and not hear 3 weeks down the line that something had happened and now we're behind schedule and obviously behind our timelines, and our budget is now increasing. So I'm going to go back now to number 9. Hopefully that gave you the big picture. So do use coverage analysis. It's not used. It's a very big, very easy to use, strong point in quality sensor, and people usually don't use it. And finally, last but not least, I will go to the 10th one, which is a newer feature, which is Ali. By the way, the project management and planning is only available in version 11, so it's not it's not making any sense for the people that are using 10 and below 10. So have that in mind as well. With 11, we have Ali, which is application lifecycle intelligence, and that's the 10th pitfall in my view. We do not use third-party integrators with quality sensor. We know that the developers like to have their own GUIs, and they like to work in their own environments, in their own user interfaces, which are Team Foundation Server, Eclipse, etc., etc., etc. What Ali does is it links your quality sensor instance with their instance of their development tool. So in essence, it brings everything from quality sensor into the developer's GUI. It also links your requirements, and this is why it's so important. So your initial requirements for development will be linked to the actual source code, and you will be able to have complete visibility of whether the source code has been changed, which means your requirement has now changed or has been completed and needs to be tested again, and so on and so forth. It also brings defects to the party, but we're not talking about defects now, we're only talking about requirements. So in essence, Ali is a great integration tool with the developers, and the developers will then work on their requirements, and they're using the requirements as a task management system to go through their workload. Okay, And as they go to their workloads, Ali brings back and forth information between their GUI to our GUI, which by us we mean the testing teams. And we are very, very keen, and we're very able to see what happens in the source code. How do the developers work? And what if they say to us now, well, the requirement is completed and it's ready for testing, and we've implemented the code, and you actually look at the requirement which is linked to the source code, and you see that the source code has not been changed. So the transparency and the visibility that Ali brings forth to the table is absolutely amazing, and it needs to be used. And from a requirements perspective, absolutely yes, it needs to be used. Especially that you have your requisite pros and the TFSs and the Eclipses and all these other third-party development tools that are being integrated via Ali. Okay, so with that in mind, okay, this is actually the second screenshot from Ali. It actually shows, if you watch my mouse, it actually shows the developers and how many files they have changed and how many lines of code. And these are all, guess what? These are all requirements straight from Quality Center, which are now integrated with the development GUIs. So for a project manager, this would be absolutely excellent. But then again, if you go back to the original subject of our discussion tonight, if people do not use requirements properly in Quality Center, your Ali integration would be useless. So it's really important that people make use of all these functionalities available to them and get a project going the right way. Okay, so now we're at the conclusions, and I'm hoping that I didn't go over time. Okay, no, it's fine. That was great. So the conclusions are, and these are the pitfalls that we went through. Do not use requirements at all. If you use them, only use them for testers, and then so on and so forth, which is wrong. This is the wrong side of things. So let me do this. Good stuff. So what we want to do in order to fully leverage on Quality Center and LM's features and functionality, both for development, testers, as well as project management teams overall, is the following. We need to use the requirements module in the first place. This is our foundation and our grounds for building up our product or to maintaining it. Then we need to use requirement management module for all the teams, not just for the testers, because every single team member has a specific requirement that they can add to the party, and they can add improvements, they can edit, they can find gaps, they can find inconsistencies, and so on and so forth. So have one central point for your requirements modeling is the way to go forward, not disparate Word documents flying over around and people trying to keep up with the versions. Also, once we use requirements, we must use customizations and extra fields to make our work a lot more easier. We want to look at efforts, estimations, durations, actuals, whatever the case is. But at the same time, we don't want to make those requirements too complex and do an overkill there, and just make them simple to capture and easy to track. That will give us the visibility that we need for our project managers. Also, remember to always use a workflow, to use the use the process behind your requirements management modeling process. You need to have something that will state from stage 1 will go to stage 2, it will go to these people. Use a RASI chart, responsible, accountable, consultant, and informed. With that, it's pretty easy to make. It's going to take 1 hour to do in Visio, and then apply that to all the team, which is the hard part, which is the culture change. Have a process to support your requirements modeling. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Then most importantly, once you start using the requirement module properly, use version control. It will help you out quite greatly. It also locks the requirements if somebody's editing them. Somebody needs to check it in or check it out. So there's configuration management or requirement management versioning controls in there, so there's a certain governance, but that governance is supported by the process, so everything is related, as you can see. Then, whether using version control or not, definitely make use of the risk-based quality management features in there in order to grade your requirements based on risk, and then assess how much of time, how much of testing time is required, and how much of effort is required from any team members. Once you do that, and once your requirements are in place, feel free to use the release planning and management properly, with the Gantt charts available in there, with the scorecards and the KPIs. Everything is related. Everything is related to the requirements. Then use the coverage analysis to track down your application quality over time with your release planning and management combined. If you don't do that, well, you're not gonna have that possibility of looking down at how the quality has grown over time in terms of requirements. How the requirements have been, let's say, 100 requirements now in first cycle, out of which 80 have failed. In the second cycle, only 60 have failed. In the third cycle, only 40 have failed, and so on and so forth. That can only be done from a requirements perspective only if the release management module is used in conjunction with the requirements. So these two together will give you that visibility. And third, and lastly, just if you haven't heard of Ali, inquire about it. You need to use Ali integrated with development systems so that everybody sees what you see in Quality Center, and the requirements being the most important one of them all. So with that in mind, I hope that you got a bit of a feel of how testers feel about requirements management and the issues I've seen around with all these teams and all these projects. With that in mind, let's go to the Q&A section. So Andre, if you want to take questions and direct it to me or whichever way.
Yes, I have a couple of questions for you, Vi. The first question is from Yuning Hao, and the question goes regarding point number 5. If no workflow is used, such as review and approval, how do you ensure the requirements are under control? For example, preventing from being changed without authorization. Control of changes is mandatory for a regulated industry.
Great question, Andre. Thanks for the person that has posed that question. The answer is pretty simple. I mean, it's not simple. It has two legs. The first leg is you mentioned that you ensure the requirements are under control and they have to be changed. They have to be prevented from being changed without authorization. That can be achieved with version control. So your workflow will state the person that is allowed to check this requirement in is your manager or your QA engineer or whoever that person is, and that requirement will not go into production, into development and testing unless it's checked in. The person that checks in will have to be that quality gate in there, so that person will have to authorize it. Now, if you want somebody not to be able to change a requirement without authorization, you simply check out all the requirements that you have in mind to a particular person, and nobody else except those people, except that person, would be able to change those requirements. Thirdly, if you don't have this workflow in place and there's no review and approval, well, you need to use version control. If you don't use version control, you can also work through the workflow customization in the back end, which I have used on several occasions. In principle, it works the same as a workflow. So if, for instance, Andre, now you are the person that is trying to edit the requirement, and that requirement is even we don't use version control, but that requirement will be checked out by me. I will not give you the authorization to edit that requirement, so you will not be able to do anything, to modify, to do any changes to that particular requirement unless I give permission to do so. So, in closing, you can do a whole series of, you can apply a whole series of methods to your requirements module, so that even though you don't have a workflow, you do have your requirements under control. You do prevent them from being changed from whoever and whenever, and you do have somebody that's authorizing them, somebody that is acting as the quality gate there. So I hope that answers that particular question. Especially in regulated industry, I know that's very important.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Howard Jesse, and it goes,
Yeah.
Can you enable version control for only certain modules of ALM, meaning only say requirements and not test plan?
Unfortunately not. The version control is applicable from site management, and you would have to apply it across your whole project. So once you enable version control, it will be applicable for the whole project. Requirements and the test plan are the only ones affected by version control. So the answer to that is no. You cannot only do it for one module or the other. I'm sure that if you do some heavy customization in the workflow, you'll be able to achieve something similar, something of sorts. But no, not with the default settings by version control. Okay, so next question, Andre.
Okay, the next question is from Dwight Lampert, and it goes, Mia, you are advocating that requirements can be fully developed and managed in the requirements module, correct?
Yes.
We often get requirements that are developed in Word or another tool like DAWs, and we end up copying and pasting them into QC. Any suggestions on how to promote the use of QC for requirements development and management?
That is one of the best questions so far, and thank you for posting this question. It's actually a great big battle that we're fighting to make people use quality centers, and I'm sure this question is based on that. The developers and the BAs like to work outside of quality center, and as you said, you're using your Word documents and these doors. I'm sorry, I've never heard of it. And other third-party tools, and yes, it's a mission to copy paste them into quality center, and it's a mission to get them organized like that, and then keep them in sync with the Word document. This is exactly what I mentioned with version control. My suggestion is have a few documents. So first of all, you need to lead awareness sessions with the BAs and the developers, and I've successfully had that at my last sites, with my last project teams. So the BAs are looking at quality center as a test management tool and nothing more. Now, I took the same documents that they have created, and I've asked them to put everything in a table format. So we're looking at the requirements being built on a table format with regards to field, with regards to user who's supposed to do what, and functionality, and so on and so forth. Then I took the same table, and I copied it in a requirement in the rich text format. As you know, you have a description which is text only, and you have another section in any requirement that's called rich text format. In there, you can copy paste any type of format you'd like to, including Word and Excel and so on and so forth, and it retains all the tables and all the values and etc., and all the formatting. So I've copied that in the rich text format. Then based on that, I've created a requirements template with the rich text format in there, and then I showed it to my BAs through these awareness sessions that I ran with them and with the developers. So if you give them just a requirement which has a template already based on what they want and how they want to see it, with all the flowers and all the fluff around, then it's a different story. If you just talk to them and explain to them what it does, they will not have the same results as opposed to showing them. Once I started showing them, they realized, hey, hold on a second, instead of me creating now this whole 40-page Word document and do all the background and do all the project identification and so on and so forth and go through all the nonsense, because honestly, some of them are completely nonsense. They're just creating text just to have pages in that Word document. What about if I go now to Quality Center and Mihai has created for me this requirement template which contains the table, which contains column headers and so on and so forth, and I just fill in what I want. And it worked, and they actually started using it. Well, they didn't use it 100%, but they still use it. So to answer your question is, you need to promote this use for quality center for the requirements section for both development and BAs through awareness sessions, and don't just do slides and don't just do theoretical show and tell. Do something practical. So take the stuff that they have given you lately, put that into requirements, modify them around a bit with version control and whatever, and within the meeting you actually show them this is how it works. That's the only way you'll get them to buy into it. I hope that answers that question. Next question, Andre, please. Andre? Hello?
Yes, I'm here. The next question, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
The next question is from Karen Foley. Do you recommend linking requirements to releases one time only? You mentioned the DCS becomes inaccurate once requirements are tested multiple times over a few test cycles.
Okay, no, I cannot recommend that. Linking requirements to releases has the purpose of, you can link a requirement to multiple cycles, to multiple releases. You don't do just one link. That is the beauty of it. So if I have my one link, my one requirement now with 10 test cases associated with it, and I'm running this this testing over 5 cycles. So you, in essence, will have 5 different, one release with 5 different cycles. I can link that particular requirement to cycle 1, cycle 2, or to cycle 1 or 3 or 5. So it doesn't really matter. Requirements can be linked to multiple cycles and to multiple releases with that. So definitely link the requirements to multiple cycles. That will give you the edge, and that will give you the correct DCS values, the correct direct cover status values over your different cycles. So if you don't link them to cycle 1 and cycle 2 and cycle 3, that's when you start having issues with that direct cover status. Unfortunately, I don't have my VMs with me now because my laptop has suffered some great damages. Otherwise, I would have had a proper demo going on. But to answer your question back, sorry again, definitely do the linking to multiple cycles and releases. Okay? Any more questions, Andre?
Yes, I have a question from Julie Matthews. Could you please describe exactly what Ali is?
Okay. Ali is application lifecycle intelligence. It's basically a bridge that you build. It's a connector. It's an integration tool between your quality sensor and your development tools, such as Eclipse and Team Foundation Server and Recursive Pro and some other technology. There's about 3 or 4 technologies that Ali supports at the moment. So in essence, you build up a different server than Quality Center on which you host Ali, and then you link your Quality Center instance to the developers' instances of, let's say, Eclipse. Now Ali will synchronize your requirements to Eclipse and back, so it's a synchronous integration. And whatever you do in Quality Center, the developers will be able to see on Eclipse, and whatever the developers do on Eclipse, you would be able to see on Quality Center. Ali also works with SCM, which is not a catchy module. So it's source code management. So it works with builds, and it works with versions, and it works with source code. So you actually, in Eclipse, you take out of 10,000 lines of code, you have 100 lines of code that are related to one particular requirement. That requirement comes from QC. Once the developer does anything on the source code, that requirement will automatically get flagged in Quality Center. The source code has been changed, etc., etc., etc. So the BA or the developer or the tester will always have full view in Quality Center with what actually happens in the source code, what happens in the backend. Okay, so I think that pretty much answers the ALI. I can actually send you. We have some PDFs from HBM. We can put you in contact with the people that deal with this ALI, which it's pretty new. It was launched last year, I think. It was Ali 1. Ali 2 was launched in Vienna last year, and now they had some other enhancements. I'm not sure if it's only 3 or whatever the case is. I think it's still 2, but they're definitely working on that integration bit because HP has realized finally that developers like their own tools, testers like their own tools, and if we can't bring the developers to the water and have them drink the water, which is quality center, then they must just work on their side, and we just integrate quality center with their tools. So that's pretty much what Ali is. Okay, Andre, next question, please, if there is any other.
Yes, there's a question from Dwight Lampard. Is Ali available in QC11 Enterprise? We do not have ALM.
Yeah, so Ali is not dependent on Enterprise or Premier. You can link it on both Enterprise and Premier, and yes, it's available for 11. Okay. All right. So.
Okay. There's no more questions.
Okay. All right. So you have our details here. Unfortunately, that's the end of this the slideshow for today. You have our details. You can reach us via the Vivid websites. Just contact us on the South African chapter. If you have further questions, or if you would like to obtain the slides in PDF format, or the other 2 PDF documents that that I showed you and I talked from, which are the World Quality Report and the Capers-Jones report as well. So without further ado, thank you very much for attending. We will be organizing another webinar soon. It will relate to how to assess on whether your quality center ALM usage within your organization is actually mature enough, and it's going to showcase how a tool assessment is done and really what is the maturity level within that organization. So thank you very much for the organizers. Andre, thank you very much for moderating and doing such a great job. This is Mia Grigorescu signing out. Bye-bye and good evening.
Bye-bye and thank you, Mia.